Hello and welcome to this video of JavaScript fundamentals, and today I'm going to be talking about the event loop. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is about the JavaScript background. So the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to try and answer two questions. So the first question, have you ever seen a while true loop in JavaScript? And the second question is, have you ever seen a funny order in the execution of code? So first of all, let's talk about how JavaScript is a single-threaded language, which means that you have some code and then what will happen is it will go line by line and the processor will execute the code line by line. And there is only one processor, which means that if you ever have a while true loop, that processor will be occupied by this while true loop constantly, and it won't have time to do any of the other instructions. And so what usually happens is that there'll be a crash within that browser. So you will never see a while true loop in JavaScript. However, if it only does line by line and code by code, how come sometimes you see code that's executed in a slightly different order than top to bottom? Well, the reason for this is actually, even though it's processed by a single-threaded language, what happens is in the browser they have a JavaScript runtime environment, and what happens is you actually have two sections. One section is the JavaScript engine, and this JavaScript engine is a single-threaded language. And so what happens is it executes that line by line. However, there's also a separate section called Web APIs. And so for certain code, what happens is the JavaScript will give that to another section, and that will be executed, and that can be executed at the same time. So this environment, this JavaScript runtime environment, this ability of the JavaScript engine and the Web API to communicate, this uses a event loop, and this event loop is what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so what happens in the JavaScript runtime environment when it enters a browser is that the browser converts or looks at the code and tries to convert it into machine code. And so what it does is it translates that language line by line. So what happens is this is the JavaScript engine, and inside the JavaScript engine there's something called the call stack. Now this is what we're going to be working with today. It also works within the JavaScript engine something with a memory heap. Now in the event loop we don't need to worry about this. However, if you want to learn more about the scope of variables, this is something that's quite important, learning how the heap and the stack interact. But for the event loop, we don't need to worry about the memory heap. What happens outside of the JavaScript engine is we have another section called Web API. Now, we have certain events and certain frameworks, as it were, that will execute in this section. So if you see a document command, like if you want to grab something from the document, which is like the HTML tag, the DOM, this would operate in the Web APIs. If you're doing any sort of timer, this would operate on the API. If you're doing any kind of event, like if you're waiting for users to interact, this operates on the API. And then what happens is the call stack is the thing that executes the JavaScript, the main JavaScript code. However, sometimes what you get is, let's say there's an event like an onClick button, and you're saying, well, when this part of the document, like when this button is clicked, I want you to do this. So that event is a Web API. However, the function that you want to have or to occur once it's clicked, that could be a normal JavaScript code. So we need a way to put back the JavaScript code or the function back into the call stack, and we call this the callback queue. So these are the three components. Now we're going to be looking at some examples of how this works. However, what I do want you to remember is that you need to think of a call stack as like a stack of magazines. So what happens is that you can't take the bottom magazine or the bottom newspaper without it all falling down and collapsing. You only have to put one from the top and take one from the top. So it's you take it's last in, first out. So this is the data structure. The web API, think of it as a cup of coffee that you can take while you're on a break, and you let someone else do the code that you have to execute. And the last one, the callback queue, think of it as just a line of people. So what this does is the first person in the line is the first person out of the line. You can't cut the line. So they're the concepts that you need to remember as we talk about this event loop. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is look at an example, because it's a great way of understanding it. And I think this is a great example. So this code is executed line by line. But if you look at the first line here, the function here on the onClick, what this does is it displays the X value. However, we haven't declared what the X value is. So in other languages, because this isn't declared, it would create an error. However, because of the event loop, this code doesn't create an error, and we'll look at why. So what happens first is the first line goes onto the call stack. JavaScript looks at this first line and says this is a document, a DOM command. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pass it into the web API, and the web API will work on the onClick function. So as soon as the human does the onClick function, then this can be implemented, this can be executed. However, while that section is doing this, I'm going to keep going. So then the code goes down. This is a function, so nothing is called until this function is called, so we miss that out. And then we go to this X equals my function, so we put that down. The JavaScript engine looks at this and says, can I execute this right away? Well, no, because this my function actually points to another piece of code. So what will happen is it will go up and it will look at this next piece of code. It will say this return A times B. Can this code be executed right away? Well, yes, we know the values, it does. So it's executed and it gets removed from the call stack. Then we look at number 2 again and we say, well, can this be executed right away? Well, yes, it can now. So now we know the value of this function. We can put it in X. We can execute it right away. So we push that. Now, at the moment, there's nothing in the call stack, and the web API is still waiting because me the user, is being very slow. I haven't clicked on this click me yet. But let's say I click on it now. What happens is this callback function, this function here, is put into the callback queue. So a callback is when you have a function or a method. This onClick is a function, or this onClick is a method here. When you have this value as another function, we call this a callback function. So what I've done here is the callback function of this onClick goes into the callback queue. Now what this callback queue does is it then checks to see if the call stack is empty. If the call stack is empty, it puts it into the call stack. And then it looks to see if it can execute. So it looks at the code. We know already what X is because we've already executed number 2. And so it outputs it there. And so that is how the event components, the event loop components work. So the key points of this is that you have to know what kind of things are executed in the web API. So anything like the document, anything that you're getting something from the doc or the DOM, that will be web API. Sorry, any kind of interval, any timer like set timeout, that will be web API. Anything like Windows.request animation frame, Windows dot something, that will be API. So there's a lot of web API commands out there that you'll just have to kind of learn as you go along. These are the main ones. And then you need to learn about the callback. So when you assign another function onto as an argument of a function. So for example, this onClick, when we want something to be onClicked, or when we want this to be clicked, what do we do? What we do is a callback. Same for set timeout. It's like after the timeout goes, what do we do? That what do we do is that callback that we put into our queue. So I have some concept checking questions now. Okay, so if you can answer all these questions, I think you've got a good idea of all the concepts that we covered today. So pause the video and try to answer those questions. So hopefully you've paused the video. Let's have a look. So what value will be outputted? 0, 1. Well, 1 will be outputted. Why do we think that is? Well, if we go down, at the moment this is 0. This will be called. This will be called, but then it will be put onto the web API because this is a timer. And then while it's being waited for, we go down to the next one, and this will be called. Now this means we add 1 to the counter. So even if that is executed straight away, because we have a callback method here, it will go into that callback queue and it'll still have to wait for the counter. So let's have a look at this step by step. So we put that counter on the call stack, it's executed straight away. We put that function there. It can't be executed straight away. We need to go to the function. Then this third line gets put onto the call stack. JavaScript Engine sees that it's a timer, so it moves it to the web API. Let's say that timer is really short, and it goes straight onto the callback function. While that callback function is in the queue, the call stack automatically adds number 4 in. This can be executed straight away, and then that's all the items in there. There's nothing else to be executed, so it goes back to the my function. Now that my function can be executed, and now the call stack is empty, the callback function will go back onto the call stack, and now that callback function can be executed, and that will be the alert. And there we have the event loop for this code. Now this is the event loop challenge. So I would like you to see if you can answer the questions. If you can answer the questions, especially in number 4, this means that you have an excellent, outstanding grasp of the whole thing, because what we have here is we've actually have a recursive function here, which means that we actually have within the function, it's calling itself. So what will happen is that call stack will get bigger and bigger until it's all fixed, and then it will go backwards down the call stack. So if you get a great understanding of this code and you're able to do all 4 questions, it will show that you really understand the concepts that we talked about today. I'm going to stop the video there. If you are interested in finding out the answers to this event loop challenge, well, leave the comments below and I'll think about doing another video on these answers. So thank you very much and goodbye.